Good afternoon. My name's Tony Cascardi. I'm the director of the Townsend Center for the Humanities. And as part of the Forum on the Humanities and the Public World, it is my great pleasure to introduce the extraordinary teacher, performer, playwright, and I also want to say vocalist, Anna Deavere Smith. Best known for her wide-ranging work in the form of documentary theater and interpretive performance, Anna Deavere Smith is, among many other things, the author of plays, including Fires in the Mirror and Twilight, Los Angeles, 1992, both of which were constructed using materials drawn directly from interviews and other archival sources, and in which she appeared as the sole performer of multiple and diverse characters. As an actress, she's appeared in several films, including Philadelphia and The American President, and in recurring roles on The West Wing and The Practice. In 1996, she was the recipient of a MacArthur Award, and in 2006, a Fletcher Foundation Fellowship for her contribution to civil rights issues. Anna Deavere Smith has taught at Stanford University and is currently on the faculty of the Department of Performance Studies at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. Her own studies were at Beaver College, now Arcadia University, from which she graduated in 1971. Since then, her degrees have been many and all honoris causa, from Bates, Bryn Mawr, Skidmore, Macalester, Occidental, the Pratt Institute, Holy Cross, Wesleyan, the School of Visual Arts, Northwestern, Colgate, Cal State Sacramento, Wheelock, Cooper Union, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Whew. Along the way, Newsweek declared her, and I quote, the most exciting individual in American theater. This afternoon's presentation is entitled, We Are What We Say. Without wanting in any way to anticipate what we will see and hear in just a minute, I will simply say that such a phrase, we are what we say, a wonderful phrase, strikes very deep chords in all of us who work professionally with language. It reminds us and everyone so powerfully that who we are, our human orientation toward the world and toward others in it, is a matter of voice. And now, to listen to an extraordinary collection of voices and an extraordinary voice, please join me in welcoming Anna Deavere Smith.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, oh, thank you. That's nice of you. Thank you so much. It's really great to be back in the Bay Area. You know, I was really bred here in so many ways. And the staff here was kind enough to go and get me a cup of coffee. And I think even though my grandfather was a coffee merchant, importing coffee beans from all over the world, when I grew up in Baltimore, this is where I had my first cups of really great coffee. Not to say anything bad about Starbucks, but don't you remember when you'd have to come all the way across the bay to get great coffee in Berkeley? And so those were the years I was here in the 70s, going to acting school at ACT. So it means a lot to be back here. So we are what we say. I mean, many of us, I think, also think that we hide behind language and that we aren't what we say at all. That language betrays us, and sometimes we deliberately lie. We pretend to be things that we're not. We have missions and values that we claim, and we're full of hypocrisy and so forth. I say we are what we say with a recognition of that, and with finding out through many years, starting really here when I was at ACT, that language nevertheless, as it is uttered, tells us something about ourselves and about each other. So just quickly how this started. Well, let me show you, for those of you who don't know what I do, let me show you first what it is. And if you don't mind, I think it's safe to take my shoes off. I'm going to take my shoes off, not because I have some idea of being some kind of earth mother, but just to make it perfectly clear to you that I believe that my project for my adult life has been to put myself in other people's words, the way you put yourself in other people's shoes, so I always perform without shoes. When I was a kid, my grandfather told me, if you say a word often enough, it becomes you. If you say a word often enough, it becomes you. Okay, so I would say the exemplar of the person who I got to meet who was interested in America the way I was Studs Terkel, who died just shy of getting to see Obama elected president. And Studs, is anybody from Chicago? So Studs was a Chicago radio man. And as a boy, he would sit in front of the radio, those days, sit in front of the radio and listen to the election returns the way most kids would listen to baseball or boxing. And so I'm going to show you what I do by first doing a tribute to Studs. Most of what I'm going to do today is the words that people have said word for word. So when I started my big project of trying to put myself in other people's words, I went to Studs and I asked him if he could tell me of a defining moment in American history. And of course, Studs would be the one to ask because he was born in 1912, the year the Titanic sank, greatest ship ever built, hits the tip of an iceberg, and bam, it went down. It went down, and I came up. Wow, some century. So when we sat down at, as he called it, a joint in New York called the Crocodile for dinner, I got him to talk to me about a defining moment in American history. And again, I'm so sorry that he just missed this election. But defining moment in American history. I don't think there's one. You can't say Hiroshima. That's a big... I can't think of any one moment I would say is a defining moment. The slippage, the gradual slippage, moral slippage is a term used by the people in Watergate. You see, we also have the technology. I say less and less the human touch. Oh, let me tell you a funny little playlet. The Atlanta airport is a modern airport. And as you leave the gate, there are these trains that take you out to a concourse and on to a destination. And these trains are smooth, and they're quiet, and they're efficient. And there's a voice on the train. You see, the voice was a human voice. You know, in the old days, we had robots. Robots imitated humans. Now we have humans imitating robots. So we got this voice on this train. Concourse 1, Omaha, Lincoln. Concourse 2, Dallas, Fort Worth. Same voice. Just as the train is about to go, a young couple rush in, and they're just about to close the pneumatic doors, and that voice, without losing a beat, says, because of late entry, we're delayed 30 seconds. Just then, everybody's looking at this couple with hateful eyes. And I happen to have a couple of drinks before boarding. I do that to steal my nerves. And so I imitate a train call. Holding my hand, George Orwell, your time has come. See, you're laughing, you're laughing. Everybody laughs when I say that. But not on this train. Silence. And so suddenly, they're looking at me. So here I am with a couple. The three of us at the foot of Calvary, about to be upped, you know. Just then, I see a baby. A little baby in the lap of a mother. I know it's Hispanic because she's speaking Spanish to her companion. So I'm going to talk to the baby, little baby with her round little face, you know. So I say to the baby, holding my hand over my mouth because my breath must be 100 proof. I say to the baby, sir or madam, what is your considered opinion of the human species? And the baby looks, you know, the way babies look at you clearly, starts laughing, starts busting out with this crazy little laugh. I said, thank God for a human reaction we haven't lost yet. But the human touch, that's disappearing, you see. So you ask about a defining moment in American history. Ain't no defining moment for me. It's an accretion of moments that add up to where we are now, where trivia becomes news, and more, less and less awareness of the pain of the other. So this is an interesting dilemma with which we're faced. I don't know if you can use this or not, but I was quoting Wright Morris, writer from Nebraska, who says, we're more and more into communications and less to communication. Okay, kids, I gotta scram. Gotta go see my cardiologist. And that is Studs Terkel the Late. So I thought that today, in deciding what I would do for you, and this idea of we are what we say, is to look at hope, kindness, imagination, and grace. So how did my decision to spend my adult life walking in other people's words come about? So I was at ACT studying there. And on the first or second day of school, I had this extraordinary teacher who was a graduate student at Berkeley, named Juanita Pratt Rice. And she was the Shakespeare teacher, and I had not planned on being an actress. I thought I was going to do something about social change, which is why I came out to the West from Baltimore. I thought that this is where the revolution was going to be, but when I got here, it was over. So by this kind of fluke, I ended up in an acting class, and I thought, well, my goodness, I want to do social change, and the people are changing, so why don't I just stick around and see what this is all about? But I was very intimidated by Shakespeare class, and so on the first day of class, Juanita Pratt Rice said to take 14 lines, look at 14 lines of Shakespeare. She said, take any 14. She said, go home and say the words over and over again until something happens, because she said, you don't really have to, do any of your deep internal work that you've started to hear about in your acting classes, searching for yourself to become the character. If you just say the words of Shakespeare, you will become the character, she said, because, you look at Shakespeare, and it's written in iambic pentameter, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. She said, however, if in the second da-da, it doesn't go da-da, it goes da-da, then that means that the person is going through something interesting psychologically. And she said the best example of it is in King Lear, when King Lear at a certain point says, never, 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 and it's all that upside down stuff. So she said, you go home, take these 14 lines, and I try not to think about it too much in my own teaching. Students aren't always so kind to their teachers, and so all my classmates are kind of like, well, who is this, and blah, 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 and so forth. And, where ACT is and stuff. So to get home, which was way out past the mission, I would have to go through the Tenderloin. And I had noticed this strip of used bookstores. And I guess Shakespeare wasn't in high demand in the Tenderloin. And so I was able to get a nice fat volume for $5, which nonetheless still seemed like a fortune. And I went home and had a basement apartment, and I just opened it up to any 14 lines. And lo and behold, I found 14 and by a woman. It was Queen Margaret and Richard III, and looked kind of interesting. She's kind of mad at Richard's mother, that dog that had its teeth before its eyes to worry lambs and lap their gentle blood, thy womb let loose to chase us to our graves. This type of talk. And so I said it over and over again. That was such a goody-goody, over and over. I mean, really, like hours. I'm not exaggerating. Well, eventually I saw Queen Margaret, standing in the room. And, I thought, well, I could never be that. Look what she looks like. She's little, She had on all this jewelry, all this stuff. And I hadn't taken any kinds of things to help me see her. It's just the words. And but this was like fascinating to me. It's like, what in the world happened that allowed me to see Queen Margaret? And it reminded me of what my imagination was like when I was a child. That, you know, when I lost a tooth, I thought that the tooth fairy came up the backyard in a coach in this all-black neighborhood, this white tooth fairy. So, you know, I thought, well, and then one of those teachers on the inspiring first day of school had made this big speech. Ethel Merman's son, Bob 611, had made this big speech about the actor's gift is imagination. And I thought, well, guess I have an imagination. You know, that's kind of interesting. How did that happen with that language? And I never had the same experience with Tennessee Williams or any of the other playwrights. So I really threw myself into trying to understand as much as I could about that with the help of Juanita Pat Rice. And then when I got out of acting school, I thought, well, what if people in my time spoke in trochees? What would that tell me about them? And I'd grown up in a fairly segregated city, southern city, Baltimore. Black people were over here, white people were over there, Jewish people were there. Black people who went to, you know, Grace Baptist Church were there. The ones who went to this AME were there. The light-skinned people were there. The ones who were in the Jack and Jill were here. And I didn't like that. And it wasn't just because I was aware that the kids across town were maybe getting a better education. I just didn't like the feeling that I was only supposed to know about that which was me and mine. Didn't like it. So I thought that if I went around America and talked to all kinds of people, that I could learn something about this country by learning things through speech. That if I were to inhabit some of the iambic pentameter and trochees of my own time, that something interesting would happen. And so that's why I've been doing what I have been doing. And so I want to share some of that with you today, thinking around this theme of hope, kindness, imagination, and grace, which I think has been in short supply, but I hope with the new leadership will come back into fashion. And so the first part of what I'm going to do for you is from my new play, Let Me Down Easy. And this is a definition of grace. I decided to talk to theologians and people like that. And I found out it's really a Christian idea. The rabbi I talked to told me there's no word for grace in Hebrew. The imam that I talked to told me there was maybe a word that could be translated. And the monk, the Tibetan monk that I talked to, just laughed at me and said, we don't have anything like that. So this is a Christian idea of grace. But I think as I go through this with the different speakers, you'll learn a little bit more about this idea of, you know, we are what we say, particularly in terms of how we say it. So the first is a theologian named James Cone, who wrote a very important, groundbreaking book in the 60s called Black Theology, Black Power. And this is his idea of grace. Yes, the word means a great deal to me. Grace is one of the first words I heard when I was in church. I heard that my mother and the other people of Macedonia AME Church in Bearden, Arkansas, where I grew up, sang about it, and they also preached about it. And grace was understood as that power that enable you to overcome very difficult circumstances. So grace is something that comes from God, a mystery. I think grace is God's love that comes to people in situations of distress. People need something to sustain them in times difficulty, whether that's personal, whether that's social, they need, that's something within. That's something within you that you can't always explain. That's something within you that's is a kind of affirmation of you. And it enables you to know who you are and be at ease with who you are, at peace with who you are, no matter what's happening around you and no matter what you're going to face. And this is Reverend Peter Gomes from Memorial Church at Harvard University. Amazing Grace. What is grace? Well, that's no small question. That is what John Newton called in his famous hymn, Amazing Grace. I mean, it's a quite an extraordinary sort of thing. The tune is Welsh, but the text is English. Newton was an English slaver and had a religious experience which convinced him that human slavery was wrong and that he should get out of that business in which he'd made a vast fortune. And so the text, which we all know as Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, describes this moment of transformation when he realized that how he had been was not how he wanted to be or how he was meant to be. So it became an act of the will for him to get out of the slave trade and become a Christian evangelist, which he did. Now, here is the story of a white man who was redeemed from his pernicious life in the slave trade. So when he says, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, I completely understand. He was a wretch. That was a terrible thing to do. And he felt wretched in doing it. But when I sing it, I'm not so sure that the exact same successes apply to me. Though I'm wretched in sin and we can create all of these co-relevant categories, but it's still not the same intensity as it was for poor old John Newton. But slaves are not virtuous by definition of being slaves. They too have things for which they must repent and of which they're sorry. James Cone. I don't think most black people know about the origins of the song. See, you cannot simply make yourself the complete good because they so bad. You see, Paul speaks about, oh, wretched man that I am. So the wretched, oh, saved a wretch like me is a form of humility in my community where it's a self-criticism that doesn't come from the dominant society. It's about your own failure to be what you ought to be. Jesse Norman, opera singer, saved a wretch like me. A slave trader caught in a mighty tempest on the ocean, thinking that he might die. He was asking for this word, grace, in spite of the awful things that he had done in his life. He still thought that there was a possibility to be saved, that he would be saved perhaps from immediate death in that tempest on the ocean, or that his soul might be saved. And it means a great deal to me that a person acknowledging the depth of wrongdoing in life, still thinking that there is an entity, a compassion in the universe that was available to him. And I think it makes it possible for a very young child or someone who's had a great deal of experience in life to sing the same song that saved a wretch like me. You can consider yourself a wretch if you said something bad about your friend in 3rd grade. Or you could consider yourself a wretch if under false information, false pretension, and with an agenda not shared with the rest of the world, that you take a country to war. Reverend Gomes might even be good for business. Most of us don't spend a great deal of time thinking about that. I've had many students at Harvard Business School, for example, say to me, you know, I would love to be a real Christian in my business dealings, but I would suffer. I'd lose. And what counts in business is success. And my fellow business dealers wouldn't behave in this way. I can't practice the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If I practice the golden rule, they do me, and I hear this all the time. Some kids say, I can't afford to be nice. Can't afford to be decent. Because that is the impression of what the world requires. And when I get more of the world's goods, and I'm running things, and I'm more secure, then I'll be good. I want to do well, then I'll be good. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. More often than not, they're never doing well enough to be good. I hear this from the professional schools all the time. I say, well, that's a tragic way to go through life. You're going to live a life of, you know, quiet desperation. Now, business people understand risk. So I say, well, why don't you risk this? Might even be good for business. Oh, they sit up and take notice. I say, it could even be good for business. People might discover you're a nice person, want to do business with you. Oh, maybe so, they say. I mean, there are openings. There are little glimmers of this. But that's the context, I'm afraid. Reverend Cone, rich and poor. And right now, this gap between the rich and the poor, between those who know and those who don't, is great. Now, it's hard to speak to the ones who know and the ones who have, but you know, religion does not speak primarily to the people who are self-sufficient. It speaks to the people who know they are not what they're supposed to be. They still in search for that meaning. They constantly searching. Gomes, jingle. We've appropriated the song Amazing Grace in a very odd way. Part of it has to do with it's the only religious theme song everybody knows. It functions like a jingle. As soon as you hear Amazing Grace, you don't think about John Newton. You think religion. You don't think about a particular setting of a text. You say God, church, something or other. Jesse Norman, Getting Through the Day. Of course, there's a great deal of question as to where the melody sort of is derived. And my feeling is that John Newton, having made more than one trip across the Atlantic and the Horn of Africa, taking people from their homeland to a new land to be enslaved, I would have thought, and it certainly has been proven, that the tune of Amazing Grace is much closer to old tunes still found in West Africa. And that John Newton was from what was at that time the United Kingdom. So the fact that the song has been sort of given credit to the Welsh and to the Scottish, by the way, that this, in my mind, simply does not, as it were, hold water. Because certainly, people in the bowels of a ship had to have some way, and I say this all the time, Anna. As a people, we have sung our way through things, not sung our way out of them. That is something different. But these songs that have been created in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century by the enslaved, this was simply a matter of getting through the day. Not getting out of it, getting through it. it could have been an African tune. Oh, absolutely, the rhythm of it, the meter of it is much closer to a West African song than it is to anything that is Welsh or Scottish. And lastly, Peter Gomes, A Glimpse. So I tend to say to people, you know, don't make a theme song of Amazing Grace. It's much too substantial and subtle to be played with in this way, unless you are going to make a change. It's not simply getting over the rough spots or the tough times. You have a share in the fallen nature of the human enterprise, no matter what your condition in this life is. So with grace, you get a glimpse. It's not a photograph, it's a glimpse of what you might be like if you always acted as if God were sort of working through you or with you, or you were a part of God's plan and design. So a grace-filled moment for me is a moment when I can be what I really think God wants me to be, which is different from what I may be, or what I'm compelled to do, or what I think even I ought to do. And that's a definition of grace. So we find it, of course, in motion. And so this is a cowboy, a bull rider, who I talked to in Shoshone, Idaho, several years ago. And I hear from him from time to time. I heard from him on election night, or 2 nights before. So, Anna, y'all gonna take the election, looks like. When Brokeback Mountain came out, we called him up. What do I want to see that for? Anyway. So this is on Toughness, and this is Brent Williams. And just pretend that this is a Coors Light. Basically, I'm an optimist. I like to say I'm an optimist, you know what I mean? You know, because it seems like, you know, sometimes I just have so much bad luck. I mean, like my wife's family's always, you know, you think maybe he's like a born loser, but because he has so much bad luck. But I mean, that bull stepped on my back. I could have lost my kidney. I didn't lose my kidney. I kept my kidney. So I don't think that's bad luck. I think that's good luck. Funny things like this happened. I was in the doctor's office last CAT scan. Saw this Reader's Digest on the doctor's office, October 2002. It was like 7 ways to be lucky. It says if you want to be lucky, you got to be around positive people. I mean, like even my wife, you know, when you said you was going to come out here and talk to me, she's like, she's not going to do that. You know, why would she do that? Then, you know, you called me up. You said you were going to come out. She looked you up on the internet, said, look how she is. Look who she is. You're not even going to be able to answer her questions. Y'all talking about how, you know, I go to college, you know, I mean, anyway, I don't think I'm a born loser. But, you know, so anyway. Toughness or what? Oh, confidence? Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I ride more on determination, confidence. I mean, confidence kind of like, I mean, you know, you've been on that bull before and you know you can ride him. I mean, confidence kind of like being cocky, but in a good way. I mean, determination is just like, fuck the form, get the horn. That's what Tuff Peterman said. He's in the movie 8 Seconds. I mean, determination is just like, I mean, you know, Pat O'Mealy, my wife's uncle, gave me my first cotton flanker rope. You know, he said, kid, you got more try than anybody I ever seen. And try and determination is the same thing. I mean, you know, a lot of guys, you know, like they safety up all the time. I've never safetied up my whole life. I mean, that may get me stepped on or something, but, I mean, determination is just like, I mean, it's just like you're going to hang on that bull even if you're riding upside down. I mean, determination is just like you're going to ride till your head hits the back of the dirt. Toughness? Well, we was in West Jordan, Utah, and this bull shoved my face right through the metal chutes, and me and my buddies, you know, took me to the hospital, and they had to, you know, sew me up and everything, and
So, you know, I had a rodeo that night. I didn't want them to put me under whatever you call it, anesthesia, so I told them to just do it without it. So, I mean, they sewed up my face, and then they had to straighten out my nose. And when they straighten out your nose, they take these 2 metal rods and shove them up your nose, and felt like it was going through my head and out through the top of my brains. And everybody said it should have killed me, and they didn't even knock me out, but, I mean, I guess I just have a high tolerance for pain. So I guess that would be toughness. But the good thing about it was, once they straightened out my nose, I could breathe, and I couldn't breathe since I broke my nose in the high school rodeo. And that's Brent Williams.
So I just want to say something about imagination. I'm sure there are some of you in this room, raise your hand or clap if you believe in arts education. So y'all probably know about a woman who was actually the same generation as Studs. I think Maxine Green is about 96 right now. And y'all probably know her books. And she speaks more eloquently than anybody I've met about art and what it gives us. And so this is about the power of imagination. And this is called November in His Soul. This is Maxine Green.
But art involves us in dimensions of our own experience that we never knew before. And the involvement one gets is partly beyond words. It's not the official lingo of education. For example, in the beginning of Moby Dick, Ishmael says he feels a dark, dank November in his soul. There's no way of translating that into official language. But that opens for me so many parts of myself that I think I know myself a little better. And then he says, when I find myself following caskets at funerals, I think it's time to go to sea. He means it's time to open up my imagination and go someplace I've never been. Anyway, but my mantra, and I probably use it too much, I tell people about the internalized oppressor, part of the human condition. My freedom is this, is that I will never get over my father or the people riding on my shoulder. And then I find my freedom in resisting, and I keep resisting. You always have something determining you. That's why I'm so crazy about wide awakeness. Sounds crazy maybe. The dialectic is usually understood like in Hegel and Marx. There's this conflict and then it's resolved. But I don't believe it is resolved. I think the tension is always there. Like it took me a long time to get over offering to get coffee for my colleagues, my male colleagues. Or I feel like curtsying when the president of the college walks by. Sometimes it sounds almost trivial, but I think that about the people in my generation who internalized a certain view of women, I'm still fighting it. I'm still fighting it. You never get over some of the bad parts about childhood as well as the wonderful parts. So I think there's a lot to do. Wide awakeness means not being passive, noticing, attending, the kind of thing that art makes possible. I agree with Dewey, who said mind should be thought of as process, as action, and not a container of ideas. I think that mind as a mode of being in the world, and I've been reading a lot about mind and memory and mind and imagination, and they all have to come together as a mode of action. Mind is not, as one philosopher said, it's not a ghost in a machine. It's a way of acting acting in the world. And then I think the way we release people to see more and feel more is wide awakeness. You have to enable our students to name the world, to name what's happening. And I tell people just the idea of paying attention, noticing, and not losing touch with your perceptive self or your imaginative self. Stop lecturing, Maxine. So that's Maxine Green. So a definition of hope that I think is very important given the state of things right now is Cornel West. To use the language of decline, decay, and despair, rather than doom, gloom, and no possibility, because I think any talk about despair is not where you end, but where you start. And then the courage and the sacrifice come in, and at the level of hope, not optimism. Hope and optimism are different. Optimism tends to be based on the notion that there's enough evidence out there that allows us to believe that things are going to be different. Things are going to be better, much more rational, deeply secular. Whereas hope looks at the evidence and says, it doesn't look good at all. It doesn't look good at all. It says, but I'm going to make a leap of faith beyond the evidence to attempt to create new possibilities based on visions that become contagious to allow people to engage in heroic actions always against odds, no guarantee whatsoever. That's hope. That's hope. Maybe this is a kind of a critique of our inclination in universities to believe in the straightforward word, the fact. And this is a French monk who travels with the Dalai Lama, and he's been studied, his brain has been studied, he's been named the happiest man in the world, Mathieu Ricard. And I met him last year because he was traveling with the Dalai Lama at a series of events that I went to. So this is happiness, which anybody here a professor of happiness? I didn't think so. Professor of compassion? I didn't think so. A professor of rejoicing? Slim pickings. Okay, so on happiness, Mathieu Ricard. I have a friend who is a very well-known French psychiatrist, psychologist, and he wrote a book on happiness. His name is Christophe André. It's a very beautiful book. It's called The Psychology of Happiness. And when he wrote that book, he had to hide from his colleagues. Because when he said that, they were like, you're not writing a book on happiness. What was that? I don't know. I don't know. It's like I don't know. It's like a great scientist writing a book on astrology or something. I mean, for them, for happiness, it's like really naive and silly. I mean, it's like kids looking for lollipops, but they just don't understand what is meant, but what we mean by happiness. In fact, we have a prayer that we say often, even walking or traveling, which is, may all beings find the root of happiness and the cause of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all beings who have happiness, may they not be separated from it, and may it increase. And may I be free from partiality and extend the loving kindness to all beings. Wait a minute. I'm trying to find the Tibetan sentence to be clear. May I have equanimity? May I have equanimity? May I be free from partiality and extend the loving kindness. That's the. May I be free from partiality without holding some close, some distant. That's the. It means extending the loving kindness, compassion, and rejoicing to all beings. Matthew Ricard. Okay, so speaking of loving kindness and compassion, I thought that just want to share with you a woman who I met in New Orleans right after Katrina, a physician at Charity Hospital. I guess there's a debate about whether Charity or Bellevue was the first hospital to be for poor people in America. And this is called Those Walls Came Down. Our population. That's a kind of common phrase. It's like our population, meaning the people that we take care of and are distancing ourselves from them. And I would say that most of the 25 residents in my program, I really think are, I respect, but you know, you do get the occasional ones that come along with an attitude of disdain for people. And I have to say that that was one of the things that I really loved about working at Charity Hospital, a public hospital, is I always thought that in my mind, so many of the people who walk through this door have been given the shit end of the stick in life, period. But you know what? In my interactions with them, I can treat them like they're the Saudi Arabian princess coming to the Mayo Clinic. I mean, there's no reason that I can't provide the absolute top-of-the-line best medical care for them. And I think that that was a very difficult thing when things deteriorated in the hospital during Hurricane Katrina. And we were the last ones to be evacuated. So that veneer for me just fell. I mean, that veneer that you can take care of poor people and you can take care of them as well as you take care of rich people, that all went away. And one of my patients said to me, he had already heard through family members that he lost his grandmother and his aunt. He's from the 9th Ward. His family gotten out. But he heard from family members that he lost his grandmother and his aunt. And, I mean, the water came up in their house 10 feet an hour. And he was just really grieving. Pretty young guy, like in his 40s. He had a spinal cord injury. So he was pretty immobile, like most of my patients, very immobile. And he was just laying in bed, and I just went in, and we were talking, and I was just sitting by his bedside, and by now, it's 106 degrees. There are no lights. We're reduced to feeding people very small portions. And, you know, in the beginning, I tried to keep a kind of stiff upper lip, like, hey, you know, we're going to get out of here. Don't worry about it, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, I think we were all just so exhausted. And I just remember sitting by his bedside, and he said to me, he said, Dr. K, have all the patients in the private hospitals gotten out? And I said, you know what? They had. And he said, well, do you think we're going to get out today? Now, this is already going on 5 days. And so I said, you know what? I said, look out, and the sun is setting. I said, they've given us a lot of promises about coming, but I look out, I see the sun is setting, and I don't know, we may be here another night. And I said, I think we better be prepared for that. And I said, I don't know, we may be here even more than one night. And he said to me, he said, do you think that they're eventually going to come and get us? And I just said, you know what? I said, I don't know. I said, I just don't really know. And that made me feel so crappy and ashamed a little bit, like ashamed to be taking care of poor people and not to be able to do for them what I wanted to do, which is to get them the hell out of here and to a safe place, you know? And, I mean, the patients at Charity, they're not dumb. The nurses at Charity, they're not dumb. They knew that we were going to be the last ones out. You know, they knew that the private hospitals were going to get private helicopters, and it wasn't a shock to anybody, but the fact that it wasn't a shock to people was so shocking to me. And you just see the desperation of being poor in this country, and in some ways the distrust. I mean, the deep
down distrust that this is not the first time that this has happened to people. You know, I'm privileged, and this is the first time that I have ever been fucking totally abandoned by my government, right? But it wasn't the first time for my patients or the nurses or the other people who work at Charity Hospital. And, I mean, I have a lot of history with the people on the floor. And a lot of them know me since I'm a medical student. And 100% of the nurses on the floor are African American. And the African American nurses and the other people who work at Charity Hospital said two things to me early on. They said, one, they opened the levees on us. And two, they said to me early on, they're not going to come and get us. And here I am coming from my privileged position. What do you mean they're not going to come and get us? Of course they're going to come and get us. I mean, FEMA knew we were here. We were in constant contact with FEMA. What do you mean they're not going to come and get us? But my patients really did sense. And that part made me ashamed. I mean, and I thought, well, that must be what it's like all the time. Just that feeling that we have to do for ourselves because nobody's going to come and get us. I mean, just that feeling of being completely abandoned. That was all new for me. Being abandoned. That was all new for me. But for my patients and the other people who work at Charity Hospital, it was just one more thing. And they just went about their business. Every nurse on that floor worked nonstop for 6 days in that heat with no power, with a flashlight. They never missed a vital sign. They never missed a urine output. They never missed a trick. And with this complete sense of resignation. And so that I had always said, you know, hey, you know, don't, you know, you're a charity hospital, but you know, don't worry about it. We're going to give you the best possible care. Well, you know what? We are going to give you the best possible care, but we can't make the government and FEMA come and get us. That's Kirsten Kurtzberg. So I'm just going to conclude with a person who I found in South Africa, who I feel is the exemplar of loving kindness and compassion and rejoicing. And I found this person in the most unlikely place. And I found her in an orphanage for children whose parents died of AIDS and children who are dying of AIDS. And this is called Don't Leave Them in the Dark. Last year, we had, I think, 4 or 5 babies, children who passed away. And this year we've had 1 so far. And what happens is they found me any time of the night and say, this little kid is very, very sick. And so I'll sit with the child until the child passes away. So I'll make sure that I'm there for every child. They don't know death. That's how I see it. They don't know that they're dying. They just know that they're very sick type of thing. And the older children that we've got here, the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old that we've got here, I sit and I talk with them the whole time about death. And we had one child here, Nomza. Charlene Hunter-Gold of CNN knew Nomza very, very well. And I sat with Nomza for days and hours and telling about the virus and telling about death. And Nomza knew that she was not going to make the weekend. And so Nomza came to see me on the Friday afternoon, and she said that her mother had visited her the night before. Now, I knew that Nomza's mother had passed away 6 years prior to that.
So I sat her down and I said, well, now what time did your mother visit you? She said, no, it was late at night. I said, well, if you see your mother tonight again, if your mother visits you tonight again, you must tell her that I said thank you very, very much that I could look after you for so long. She said, no, she will. So the next morning, the Saturday morning, I came in here, and Nomza was sitting on the stair. And she said that her mother had visited her the night again. And she said that her mother said that she must pick all her clothes that she's coming to fetch her, that she's going home. And I promise you it was. So I walked up to her. And I said, well, now, did you tell your mother that I said thank you very much? And she said, yes. And my mom said, thank you very much. And I had gone into her room. All her clothes were picked, put in plastic bags, and it was waiting for her. That morning, that Sunday morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, Nomza passed away. And I made sure that I bury her next to her mummy. So her mother came and fetched her. And she was prepared. She knew she was going to die. She was prepared. She knew she was going to die. And it's not a bad thing. She was prepared to go. All her clothes were picked. All her teddy bears were picked. And I took everything, her clothes, her teddy bears, and I put it in her coffin. So she went very happily. Well, I'll just tell them that there are different stages of life. I say you get born, and sometimes when you're born, you're sick. And we talk about the germ, and I say sometimes you're born and you got this germ in your body. We talk about the germ. I sit on the carpet, and we talk about the germ. We play with the dolls. I say, look at this ugly germ that's got into the body, and it's making this little child very sick. And sometimes this child has had enough, and you know they're getting sicker, and you know they're getting to the next stage. And they ask questions like, what happens if I'm dead? I say, nobody can answer that. And they ask about God. And they always say, can we come back and visit you when we're dead? You know, that type of thing. They always just want to say, can we come back to Chance Orphanage when we're dead? You know, that type of thing. And I just tell them, you're always in my heart. Even if you've passed away, you're always with me. You're always in my heart. You know, so in any case, don't leave them in the dark. Don't leave them in the dark. That's Trudy Howell being what she says. Thank you.
Thank you. It was just an extraordinary range of voices, of voice images, maybe. We have about 30 or 40 minutes for questions and comments. And so I'd like to invite anyone who would like to ask a question, please to stand up. And because it's unlikely that you can be heard in the whole room, I'll try to repeat the essence of the question so Anna Deavere Smith can respond. So if you would like to ask a question, please stand up. Raise your hand and stand up, and don't be shy. Yeah, here, Julie.
So I found it really interesting that you mentioned that before becoming an actress, you really had to do some of the social change, and clearly your work surrounds issues of public interest and social change. Could you give us some of your reflections on art or your art as public?
So the question is on the relationship between social change and art, and especially about your art as something that is public.
Well, I think in my case, my art is public from the very beginning, because from the moment that I have an idea, I'm out in the world seeking to have that idea, out in the world studying the idea with real people. So I think it's public from the beginning. And then, of course, I'm very interested in what happens when the work meets an audience, and in fact developed an institute at Harvard called the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue, which was specifically about, what happens when artists leave the studio even too early to engage with the world. And I'm continuing to develop that now at NYU. So I think that in my case, and my interest is exactly in meeting the public right away and having a dialogue and learning what they think rather than what I think.
Yes. Or question is,
No.
might you be heading to the West Wing?
Might I be heading to the West Wing? No. I just came back from a conference in Paris on cultural diplomacy, and Martin Davidson from the British Council said that art should be at arm's length from government. And I got in a really interesting debate about that with a very wonderful dancer, Damien Wurtzel, who just retired from the New York City Ballet. And he doesn't agree. But I think that the importance of being at arm's length has to do with, in part, the fact that which is why I like the bull rider so much, is that he doesn't say he's confident, he says he has determination, is that we can deal with doubt. We can be full of doubt rather than confidence. We don't have to know. It helped me years ago to read in the Paris Review an interview of Ionesco, the French playwright, asked, why he didn't become a statesman, which is one thing he might have done, and he said, well, I can have more than one idea. I could have... And I love the image of, apparently, I was told this, I'm not a scholar of this, but I was told that Whitman and Lincoln never met, never sat down and talked. They saw each other on the street and kind of nodded and acknowledged each other. And I kind of think that that's a good way, is that acknowledgement. And then, Whitman did wonderful things for this country. So in my case, I won't be headed to the West Wing. Although let me say one last thing about it, which is also both the greatness and the problem about, television. And I think that, the West Wing is one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had. But I was on the runway on September 11th in LaGuardia, and, my plane didn't take off, and, they had said, it looks like there's a plane that hit the World Trade Center. People were still reading the Wall Street Journal, And so I got up and I went to the front. This is when you could go right up to the front. And the stewardess wasn't there, but the pilot walked out. And I said, there was kind of a staticky. Did they say that a plane hit the World Trade Center? And he had his hands in his pockets, and he said, yeah, and another one just hit, so that can't be an accident, it has to be a terrorist. And so, of course, I get off the plane, and everybody gets off. Still, in LaGuardia, people going to the business lounges and stuff there. Nobody's going crazy. And I thought, and I called my agent, I said, do you know what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. And he said, don't worry, we'll find you another flight to Arkansas. Just hang on. I said, Carlton, turn on the television. It's not like that. So finally, I go outside, and there's no cabs, and people are saying, you can't go back to the city. I said, what do you mean you can't go back to the city? So I decided I'll just get on whatever's moving before it gets crazy. Nobody's out yet. So I got on this hotel bus, one of these hotel buses, and this woman came rushing to the back, and she goes to me, are you on your way to Washington? It's like, are you on your way to Washington? I'm not the national security advisor, so... But the other funny thing about that was this hotel, which was like a Marriott. Who do I run into at the lobby of that hotel but the person who helped me with my role in the West Wing, who was Sandy Berger. And he's the one that told me how serious it was. But anyway, so no, I'm not on my way to Washington.
Yes, here.
When you interview people, how do they respond when they know you're going to be taking a part of them with you and sharing with other people they're never going to?
So the question is, how do the people you interview respond when they know that you're going to be taking a part of them with you and sharing that with other people?
Well, I've been doing this for a long, long time now, and since the 70s. So by now, I'm specifically looking for that person who would love to go to the mountaintop and scream their story. And so that's what I'm looking for. And so those kinds of people, and I don't know if we have 3 minutes later, you know, there's a character I didn't do who exemplifies that. Those kind of people, I mean, I'm just a media. I'm the media. I mean, I'm just like a camera, and they speak through me, you know, but I mean, that's just what it's about. So I'm specifically looking for that kind of person now.
Here.
I just want to hear a little bit more about your process. Do you have an idea for something, you get the idea and then you go out and search for it, or do you find people coming to you or seeking? Is it directed by you or directed by what you think people want to say?
So the question is process. Do you go out in search of people and ideas? Do they people come to you? How does that work?
Well, I don't go searching for ideas. However, my latest work, which it was inspired almost 10 years ago by me being invited to the Yale School of Medicine to interview doctors and patients and to do medical grand rounds. But that was more of that, you know, I did that as a commission, and then I just got real interested in the human body and the kinds of things, fair and unfair, that happened to it. But, and it changed a lot since when it was medical grand rounds and what it is now. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of a combination of the two, you know, and I've done a couple commissions, but it's a lot of work to do for a commission.
Yeah, I saw some hands toward the back. Yes.
You just said that you're just the media, that you're just the camera, and I'd like to challenge that statement a little bit. And you talk about self-reflexivity in your work, as far as honoring other people's voices. And is there a tension between you honoring other people's voices and your own voice as you walk in their words? And that
Yeah.
So the question is whether you are something more than just a media, whether there's self-reflexivity, your work, theirs.
It's a kind of media. You should say the question again. I shouldn't cover you because not everybody heard it.
The question is whether there's not something more to what you do than being a media, whether there's self-reflexivity in the work, to what extent are your different voices or positions mixed, to what extent are you in this as much as they. It's a maybe slight elaboration on the question, but close.
You know, it's a kind of media. So the kind of media that I am is best exemplified by one of my colleagues at NYU, Richard Schechner, who was one time telling me about how an actress wants to be Medea, right? So it's a big part, she's all excited, everything starts out great, and then it starts to get hard. And, you know, it gets to the point that, you know, pretty soon the director is saying, you know, you're not Medea. Sorry. And by now, when it gets to be like that, I mean, she's not herself anymore. Lost, her wits are not with her, so she's not Medea, she's not herself, she's a not, which is a positive. So I know I can never be anybody but me. But I am always in the enterprise of, number one, I say this in my book, Letter to a Young Artist, putting my identity out for rent, not for sale, for rent. And that I'm trying to keep myself at bay and trying to walk this bridge towards the other. I'm trying to reach. So my media is that reach, and that's all it is. And sometimes that reach is educational and pleasing to the people I portray. And then I develop relationships with them, and at this point in my work, that's what I'm interested in, is the bull rider. You know, I brought him to New York. He's, you know, I love getting those phone calls from him. And his Republican, Shoshone, Idaho, anti-immigration, I mean, the whole thing. I like having those relationships with the people who are very different than I am, and constantly being entertained by the reach in a technical and a spiritual manner.
It strikes me that the voice is obviously central to what you do, but you must be have an extraordinary ear to do what you do as well. Are you conscious of the way in which you listen and retain what you hear?
Well, I mean, I do use a tape recorder.
Okay.
I mean, I couldn't have done this before tape recorders were invented, and the father of the great Alan Lomax, the great musicologist and the extraordinary folklorist Bess Lomax Hawes, John Lomax interviewed cowboys and stuff, and it's my understanding that he had to have a huge pickup truck to carry this huge instrument in that he did these recordings with. And even when I started, my tape recorder was like that. And now I can use an iPod. Cameras are small enough that I can use video. So all of these are recorded. And, you know, and I've learned, I never had a problem listening. As a kid, I listened to everybody. And Eudora Welty describes not being able to be at the dining room table and sitting outside of the room when all of her relatives convened. And she said, and then my ears would open up like morning glories. So my youth was a lot like that. You know, when certain cousins came to our house, or aunts and uncles, at a certain point we'd have to go to bed, and I would love to hear them, you know, downstairs laughing loud and talking and telling stories. So it's in my nature.
Yes. Question in the back.
Well,
your work is a spiritual practice.
Yeah, I didn't say it was a spiritual practice. I said technically and spiritually, using the word spiritual very, very loosely. I don't know if my work is a spiritual practice at all, except if the repetition of words has the kind of mystery to it that I think it does, right? You know, in other words, that the repetition of words has a kind of a transcendental potential, right? And that I think prayer and chanting is about that. One time when I was studying how to figure out how to do what I'm doing, I went to hear the poet Michael Benedict read. And I was sitting about like here, and he was here. And the next day, I was sore all over, you know. So I found my way to him. Oh, Mr. Benedict, it was so great. And so, but the funny thing is, I was sore all over after you finished. He said, well, that's interesting, because those poems were curses against my ex-wife. And so that left me with as many questions as finding Queen Margaret in my room. It's kind of like, okay, so what is the power of a word to break your heart, to heal you, to change the world? And I think that words have that kind of power, and that there are many people who are real magicians of the word. In my case, it's a very technical enterprise. And so I would not pretend to inhabit or understand those kinds of mysteries that language holds. But I wish I knew, but I don't.
Catherine.
Thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. I wanted to learn more about what is taking you to South Africa, because I've been hearing about you going maybe multiple times, and I'm just curious what project took you there, and if the whole experience of the reach was different in that kind of a context.
So the question is, what's taken you to South Africa, and whether the experience of the reach was different in that context?
Well, I think I first got interested in South Africa in the 80s when I was teaching at ACT in the summer training congress, which was, like tons of people from everywhere. And on the first day, people would stand up in this room, 200 and whatever, and say who they were. And I loved that. And on that one year, and I used to be something called a master teacher, which means I would teach everybody. And this attractive woman stood up and said, hello, my name is Teresa Player, and I'm from South Africa, and I'm not a racialist. And I was fascinated because nobody ever said the word race or racism. People don't talk that way in most acting conservatories. And you're usually counseled when you're a young teacher, as I was at the time, not to talk like that. So I wanted to know, who is this person? And I got to know her, and she was the daughter of a famous golfer, Gary Player. And I was immediately interested in how easy it was for her to stand up in that overwhelmingly white environment. She was white, but to say that, who is that? And so I wanted to know about this openness about race, even in an environment that was one of the bitterest, most fractious environments. And in '94, when apartheid fell, I was on Broadway, but my one goal was to go the minute I could after that. And I went, and I had a very interesting trip. And I've gone back a couple of times since, and I like the way South Africans talk. I wouldn't want to live there. I don't really like Johannesburg. I can't say I like South Africa, but when I'm there, I have an extremely rich intellectual engagement, very deep, for some reason that I'm not sure about.
Well, so if you were to interview yourself, what would that look like?
I'm not interested. And, my work has been, in a way, a aggressive run away from that idea that, as an artist, you should write about yourself, write about what you know, and I just am not that interested in that. I know myself pretty well. And I just...
Don't want the job. Let's take maybe one or two more questions. Yeah, here. You saw Margaret in the room.
Yeah, well, that's that funny thing about, was me saying the words of that speech, those 14 lines over and over again, was it some kind of an incantation? I don't know. I think it was probably a form of intense concentration that I battered away the kinds of things that, keep you in the real world. And for a moment, I had, as I mentioned, the kind of experience that children have. That is, we all have that potential. We all have it. And, once we start to read and write and go to school and stuff, it goes away because we have to be involved in other kinds of enterprises. But we all have that really marvelous, jeweled city inside of us that's full of characters like Queen Margaret. And we don't live in a society where it comes forward that often.
Let's maybe take one more question here and then in the middle. Go ahead.
It occurs to me that one of the things that we really need in our culture are more stories. And I wonder if you would talk about that and the idea of your work as a way of retelling the stories of our time.
So we need more stories in our culture, and how is your work a way of telling stories in our time?
I actually think we have many stories in our culture. and many ways of telling stories, and more than ever. And it's one of the things that's making the people who run media organizations kind of terrified, is that, you know, you can all go home tonight and put a story on the web or on YouTube. And so I think we are in a time where there are many, many, many stories coming forward. In my case, I think my interest is mostly about identity and how it is expressed in the form of a story. But I think we have so many stories, really, and people are telling them in new ways.
Okay, we had a question. Yes, here. So in listening as you do, how do you stay open to the pain and the sense of loss that you hear in other people?
Well, you know, that's what I'm trained to do, is to feel, right? I mean, I don't know that it's the best kind of makes my life the most efficient life to be an affected person. But when I was a girl, I thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and I went to see West Side Story, and I cried for 2 days, and not because most kids, that would be because they, you know, wanted to be a dancer or whatever. And I just couldn't stop crying for some reason that I don't know. And my mother was like, "That's it. You can't be a psychiatrist. You're too sensitive. That's it. That's it. That's not going to happen." Little did she know. And so, to me, that identification with loss, the reach towards loss, is what I have been trained and trained myself to do. And that's in part what artists can do. And to take it back to Cornel West's idea of hope, that, or the way that James Cone was, I'm sure you probably know about James Cone, talking about the people, it's hard to talk to the ones who know and the ones who have. It's hard to talk to them. But the people who, religion speaks to the people who are still in search for that meaning. And so, to me, to go out every day in that search means that somewhere in the night before, you suffered some kind of a loss of that understanding that you thought you had the day before. And when Cornell is talking about hope, saying, you know what, forget about evidence, it looks really bad, but I am going to make a leap of faith. And in that leap, I'm going to go beyond evidence. And I'm going to try to imagine new ways of being. And I'm going to create that in such a way that it gives people the courage to go forward in spite of what the evidence looks like. He's really talking about the dignity of struggle. The dignity of struggle. And I just think that is like fabulous. And the people who do it in a much more real way than me, who go and teach in the poorest schools, the way my mother did, or Trudy Howell, who heals spiritually kids who are in that state of loss, or Kirsta Kurtzberg, what she's trying to do. I really admire that courage. And even what our president has in front of him right now. And a leader who is embraced by this country and the world, in part because he represents a history of not only accomplishment but loss. I think there's something really inspiring about touching loss, because you think, maybe I can get it back. And every single day you go out because you're foolish enough to have the idea that you can get back that thing you lost. So I find it, I feel blessed that I'm in relationship to loss.
Let's take one last question. One last question, if there is one. Yes, I did promise here. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to attempt to summarize that, but I think we all sense a bit of that gratitude. And maybe just as a closing remark here, I would say that in addition to the wow factor that we all have when we watch you and listen to you, there's something that transcends that. That's a generosity that you bring through what you say to us that I want to thank you very much for.
Thank you so much.